Good morning. So, step number one, we know, is you pay yourself first and you create a nest egg that you're never going to touch. Step number two, as we talked about, is you got three buckets. You got your security bucket, growth bucket, and dream bucket. So, the security bucket is basically cash. You want to have a 6 to a 12-month reserve of cash so that if something happens, you can pay your bills for a 6 to 12-month period of time. And this bucket is looked at as incredibly conservative. Bucket is both growth and risk assets. And most of the money people that we talked to over the weekend would even put gold in the growth bucket. They wouldn't put it in the security bucket, which I found kind of amazing. They put real estate that was paid in full, which they didn't recommend you do, but real estate that was paid in full goes into the security bucket. So if you own farmland, if you own your house, then that counts. But otherwise, the security bucket is cash. So it's a 6 to 12 month stockpile of cash so that if you go down, if you get injured, if you get ill, if something happens, then you can pay your bills for a 6 to 12 month period of time. Then you get into the growth risk bucket. And first of all, you got to divide up what percentage of the money that you're paying yourself is going into each bucket. And that's based upon how you feel, your age. The younger you are, the more risk you can take. If you're not married, if you don't have kids, you can take more risk. But those percentages are really for you to figure out. Everybody's got to decide, am I going to do 40% in security and 60% in risk? Is it going to be 50-50? Am I going to do, if I'm 23 and I'm single and I'm just getting out into the workforce, maybe I'm only going to do 10% in security and I'm going to do 90% in risk. But then in that risk bucket, that's where you start figuring out where you're going to invest. And the biggest thing to think there is, rule number one, remember, don't lose money. Don't lose money. Rule number two, remember rule number one. Well, then the next thing is the only free lunch, and we heard this from Ray Dalio, we heard this from all of these investment managers, is the only free lunch is diversification. Because what diversification allows you to do is it allows you to increase your return without increasing your risk. And in fact, it downsizes your risk when you diversify. So let's think about diversification. Now, normally you think about that as, well, I need to have, a bunch of stocks that don't correlate. Well, remember, they want you to start out doing like stock funds until you get to a certain level, 50,000, 100,000. Don't go out and try to buy individual stocks. The reason for that is because you could buy 7 stocks and pick 6 right and 1 wrong and end up losing money. So that's why you wait until you get to a certain period before you do that. But it's not just that your stocks don't correlate, don't have everything in tech, don't have everything in big pharma, don't have everything in blue chip. You want to own a little of all of those things, but you also want to own stocks all over the world. You don't want to just own stocks in the United States. You want to own international stocks, different stock markets. Some stocks give you exposure to international markets. So like Apple, obviously, is a very international company. Starbucks is a very international company. So they give you exposure to other markets. But then you got to go further. So you want to own stocks, but you want to own stocks in different markets. You want both foreign and domestic. You want your stocks to not be correlated. Eventually, you want to have currency and different currencies. You don't want to keep all your currency in one currency. When you get into real estate, and you don't have to get into real estate personally, remember, you can invest in real estate through other real estate investors. Almost every financial person does that. But even your real estate, you don't want it to be in the same place. You want to be in the United States. You want to be in different locations in the United States. So you could invest in a series of real estate investment trusts that invest in different areas, or you could invest with individual investors and then do it in different areas. So do one on the West Coast, one on the East Coast, one in Chicago, one in wherever, Atlanta, one in Houston. So you want to make sure that all of these things don't correlate. You want to move your stuff around. So gold and silver, most people, the advice there is to own the actual metal and to keep it in like a safety deposit box. And then you got the whole crypto thing. They all own crypto, but they all own very little of it. And they own a smattering of it. So they'll own Bitcoin and Ethereum, but then they'll own a bunch of others too, just figuring, maybe one of these is going to be the one that works out, but that's a very small percentage of their portfolio. They'll do bonds, and the bonds, again, all over the world, because there's a bond is basically a loan. If you buy a bond, you are essentially loaning money to either a government or to a private company. If you're loaning it to a private company, a lot of times that private company needs to raise money because they're in financial trouble, and those are called junk bonds. They're a little bit riskier, but they pay a little bit more. Government bonds pay very little. In fact, for a period of time, a couple of years ago, you had to pay the government if you were in Germany in order to give them your money. Craziest thing ever. But even the bonds, once they get their portfolio got big enough, the bonds were all over the place. They didn't just have bonds in the United States. They had government bonds all over. They had business bonds all over. And they would also do municipal bonds when, Philadelphia decides that they got to redo their subway system, and so they'll issue bonds. They would go do that. Just because it would give you a little bit better yield, and they thought that there was security there. So the diversification idea is not just, I want 7 stocks that aren't correlated. It's uncorrelate all of your investments. And the other thing in this quick little snippet, before they invested in anything, they did their homework. These guys are not throwing darts at a board. So their advice to you is give your money to money managers for a period of time or forever. But if you're going to manage it for yourself, then make sure you do your homework. They don't invest in anything until they've really thought it through and looked at it and made sure that they've thought about what's the downside. What are the problems that I'm not thinking about? What can go wrong that I'm not considering? Rule number 1, don't lose money. After rule number 1, pay yourself first. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you very much for watching. We're all in this together. Let's take care of each other.